Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick Casale.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to Divergent Conversations. Today we have Dr. Karissa Burnett. She is a trailblazing depth psychologist and a trauma specialist known for bridging science with soul, which I love that statement. As the founder of Divergent Pathways and a late diagnosed autistic ADHDer herself, she provides transformative therapeutic assessments that empower clients to embrace their authentic selves. Featured in the American Psychological Association monitors on Psychology magazine for advancing neurodiversity affirming care, Dr. Burnett advocates for disability justice, providing consultation to the ACLU, and using her voice to promote systemic change. Also a fantastic dancer. Found this out in Italy firsthand, when you were dancing with that old Italian man at the restaurant. So that was also super cool.
Wow. Thank you. Good to be here with you both. Oh, yeah.
It's so good to have you. I don't know if you know this, but you were one of the first, I think you were the person that connected me to the neurodiversity affirming space. I met you a month into my discovery on, can't remember what Facebook group it was. It was maybe Autistic Women or something. And you told me about the traditional Facebook group for ND affirming. And I didn't even know that was a thing, neurodivergent affirming. So you were my gateway into the NDs, finding all the other people who were thinking about ND affirming work. So thank you.
Oh, wait, hold on.
Wow.
So after my discovery, Karissa, I text you because you had just taken one of my courses to say hey, I got these results. Can you help explain them to me and help me make sense of them? And then you sent me a 12-minute voice memo making sense of everything that I needed to make sense of. So just want to thank you for that too.
Wow.
How are you
You're
doing with all
welcome.
these
Wow.
compliments?
Yeah. No, that's really profound and beautiful and means a lot to hear that. And yeah, I know this is a long time coming. And it's really just such an honor to be here with you both. I'm so proud of you and so appreciative of what you've created and all you've done for the community. And you're just so awesome. So excited for this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for our conversation. I know a bit of your work. I know you do a lot of assessments, and I know how much detail you put into it, and how much of, well, speaking of soul, how much of your soul you put into it, which I think makes for exquisite affirming autism assessments. But I know takes a ton out of you because of the complexity and the nuance and the layers of which you are thinking about people's experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Absolutely. It's an honor. And I take it seriously, journeying with people in assessments. I think we'll probably talk about that a little bit more as the podcast goes on. But, I don't want to get it wrong. And I care a lot about how I write the thing. And I want it to have the right shade of the thing, to really convey the truth of their experience. Probably a lot of that comes from medical gaslighting and reading things myself, it hurts, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we will get, I want to get into autism affirming analytic assessments.
We'll do that. So we're going to talk about psychoanalytic theory, wisdom,
therapy,
insight, ideas, all that, right? So, and I'd say depth oriented, because that includes Carl Jung and stuff. That's more my speed, but all of it. But so one of the things I want to start with is in training and in general in the field, at least I heard several times, autistic people can't do psychoanalytic, depth-oriented, psychodynamic therapy. Oh, they're autistic? Nope. They need CBT. certainly ABA, right? And the in adults, the CBT, et cetera, probably a little bit of an extension of that assumption with just behavioral stuff only. But beyond that, like, they don't have an imagination, or they're not self-reflective, they're not introspective, they can't, they're too literal, so they can't do any kind of symbolic stuff. Like, just these awful, harmful, incorrect stereotypes and assumptions made that autistic people can't do this depth-oriented kind of work, when actually I think it's the opposite.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up. I was thinking the same thing of like, we just did what we're talking about, where we took something kind of, we took an interaction and then we went deep with it to understand kind of the underpinnings. And that is what I love about depth work is these everyday moments become these portals to much deeper self-understanding and much deeper like interpersonal understanding. And I love that work. It's so generative. It's so engaging. And I also heard, not as much as you, because I didn't go to as focused of a psychodynamic training program as you, but I have heard similar things around CBT for autism, and yeah, that we can't do depth work. Whereas for me, like, I tried a lot of therapies, and it wasn't until I worked with a psychoanalytic therapist that that therapy finally worked for me. And yeah, I see it being such a rich frame of therapy for many of us, not for all of us, because no therapy works for all of us, but for many of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If we think about some of the common autistic strengths, and of course it can look different for everybody, and we all have different profiles, different strengths, but in general, right, there often is heightened pattern recognition and a lot of like attention to detail and different nuances, right? And there's this like deep processing. And often there is a lot of introspection and self-reflection, partially driven by masking and survival, right? Maybe to start, but these are all things that really align with depth work. And I'm just thinking about like when I was younger, all these different therapies and stuff. It wasn't until working with a Jungian therapist that I found, I was like, oh, I could understand. Because what the psychoanalytic stuff does, psychodynamic, is like the modern term that gets used. You might hear us use it interchangeably, or depth, that's it too. But like, it explains the why. So I could try all day long, like CBT things, replace the thing with this, or, just try to do this instead of that thought or whatever. But why? Like, why can't it, why isn't it working? And then I would feel broken even more. Cause like, well, I'm doing the things I can't, it's on a worksheet. I mean, geez, like, why can't I do this worksheet? Like, I've tried, like, there must be something wrong. And certainly, neuronormative, that's part of it. But also, I needed to understand the why. And I think a lot of us do. It's logical to understand the why, the patterns, how childhood things form templates, etc.
I was the exact same way, and I had so many whys especially until identification, because the math didn't add up. The internal suffering that I experienced and the level of mental health struggles I experienced didn't match up with my external life. Like it didn't make sense. And so I had a lot of whys, and a lot of those were also deeply existential, and I needed a container that could hold that complexity. Yeah, I've also found with CBT a tendency, because our brains are so, I think, often complex, that what I notice is it tends to get into a wrestling match. So maybe we're like reframing a thought. And then like if I try to reframe a thought, then I'm going to have a counter voice that's arguing with the reframed thought. And then I'm like 4 steps down where I'm arguing with myself, and I'm more entrenched in the struggle rather than like, oh, I've reframed that and now I'm moving on.
That's where parts work can be helpful, which is
Yeah.
also psychoanalytic depth style. Yes.
Yeah. I've noticed
Yeah.
that IFS, so internal family systems, is a really popular framework for a lot of both autistic and ADHD folks. And I think it's neat because it combines depth work and it has something very concrete to anchor in when we start talking about parts. Like it's a very concrete, like I can externalize, I can talk about that part. And so, yeah, I think that can be a really powerful access point for a lot of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like I've heard you two talk about before, and maybe even you, Patrick, especially like energy stuff. I don't know. This is where, when I learned about Carl Jung, especially, and like the collective unconscious and synchronicities, right? And whoa, like almost like this magical soul aspect, that there could be room for that, and like this depth of meaning and stuff. It really aligned with this like just energetic attunement or pattern, depth of feeling vibes thing that I had experienced. And I guess I was curious if that's part of your experience too, Patrick, or what you meant about energy.
Yeah, I think I've always felt that way in terms of being able to pick up on energy and receive energy. And I think that it's an interesting phenomenon for me because I haven't really explored a lot of depth-oriented therapeutic modalities aside from maybe IFS to some degree. I've never done any psychoanalytic or psychodynamic. Stayed very much in like the solution focus, CBT, DBT, all the BTs. And none of those ever worked for me. And like Megan was saying, just that existential processing and having, and you, Karissa, saying like wanting to know the meaning of things and wanting to get to the bottom of things. But I'm also like, my being is like constantly scanning for understanding energy around me. And I've never really been able to put words to that. You had said something to me in Italy about that. And I was like, huh, because when we use like, I'm just thinking of a Facebook post I made last night about looking for my own therapist. And I was like, I don't really want anyone who's like too, quote, woo, right? And you and I were kind of talking about this in Italy. And you were like, well, picking up on energy and intuition is definitely like a version of that. It's in itself too. And I was like, huh, I had never processed thinking about this way before.
I think that's one of the reasons I like psychodynamic theory, and particularly the idea of the collective unconscious, is it provides, because I'm similar to you, Patrick, in that like I'm a weird mix of like I get uncomfortable around a lot of woo and people that lead with a lot of that energy. It feels a little bit overwhelming for me. But in my personal life, in a very structured way, I have a lot of things, especially around energy and connection, that would look and be very woo, but it's got a kind of intellectual framing around it. And I think that's part of what some of analytic theory does, is it provides a robust framework to understand some of these experiences. Like I think a lot of us are pretty tapped into the collective unconscious and have these really profound, what some might call spiritual experiences around that. So I know for me, especially as I was moving away from religion, having an alternative framework to capture these experiences that I have has been really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I honestly haven't done as intense research into this as I want to someday, but I've heard it said and theorized and felt that perhaps historically, witches, oracles, shaman, absolutely, hermits, like maybe they tended to be autistic sometimes. There's something to it, possibly, right? I certainly resonate with that. So there's this interesting thing I realized in prepping for this that I thought was pretty cool, that I'll say now. No, we'll go from there. Like, I realized autistic people often make the unconscious conscious frequently, right? So like through our natural ways of just being in the world. The making the unconscious conscious thing, that term is used in psychoanalytic theory. That's like the thing. Like, that's what we do. We want to make the unconscious conscious. That's how healing happens. We want to get insight into that and realize what's going on underneath, right? And again, like why maybe actually depth work is it aligns with us, but also just in general, maybe why things are tough sometimes, but also some strengths maybe worth exploring a little bit. Like, I think we're often making the unconscious conscious, whether we realize it or not, just through, picking up on more things, depth of processing, often just answering things truthfully or not going along with the neuronormative script that's expected. It's almost like we often mirror things to people. Well, maybe we don't always even intend to, right? Or even if we're just sitting there and maybe stimming a little or just not even, just being ourselves to some degree, like that could be enough for people to have a reaction sometimes. How dare they kind of, right? And that comes from like their shadow would be the idea because they're not allowed to be their true selves on some level, right? There's something to this, like, this kind of stuff it doesn't explain, but it gives a little bit of insight into why perhaps society has such a problem with us sometimes.
Why we make society uncomfortable, because
Right.
it's shining a light on an unconscious. That's a really interesting idea, Karissa.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Is that a new thing? Like, how have you both conceptualized that before?
It's slightly different, but I have this children's book that like wrote itself in my head that I wish I like had the skills to actually turn it into a children's book. But the idea of this children's book is it's a child that's like about to depart to be born on the earth, and it's talking to a divine being, and it's given an option. Like, you can have this life, and kind of a like description of a neurotypical life, or you can have this life, and you're going to feel things really sensitively. You're going to like, these will be some of the strengths that come with it, but there's a sacrifice to pay, is that you are going to be the signal to society of what is not working. So like your body will more sensitively react to the toxins. You will be tied to authenticity, but it will be a signal for society to help society, but it's going to be hard.
And I said they listened.
Yeah, it would. It would. And then I've also seen this metaphor of like the and words and metaphors and morning fog, the coal mine, the bird in the coal mine.
Oh yeah, canary in the coal mine. Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the autistic experience of how both on a like, again, a bodily level of like, we do tend to respond more sensitively to toxins in the environment. So we're often signaling to humanity kind of sacrificially where we're going awry. And so
Sure.
that idea, I feel like that idea connects to this idea that you're playing with around we make the unconscious conscious, that there's something about our presence that is often deeply authentic that can be really uncomfortable to be around, and that the things we signal toward can be really uncomfortable to be around.
Yeah. But the idea is that, it takes what you're saying, which absolutely, I think that's very true. But then it adds this layer of, why don't they listen? Why are they uncomfortable? Right? Because it could be, wow, the canary in the coal mine, the canary's tweeting or not. Oh no, we should listen. But that doesn't really go that way. Right? It's more of a oppression is often the reaction, or punishment, or gaslighting, or that didn't happen. I didn't say it like that. You're not feeling that correctly, etc. Right? That tends to be a pretty common experience. So it's unfortunate, at least from what I've experienced and seen often, the sensitivity, this keen sense of maybe what's happening, intuition, feeling, vibe. You know, we take in way more stimuli from the environment. It makes sense to me that we're processing things, right? Like, and have a pulse on it. When it's consistently, chronically invalidated, gaslit, punished, I think a lot of us turn it off, and we learn to not listen to our emotional compass. We dissociate it away. Alexithymia, I think, is in here a little bit if we want to look at it from this perspective.
Well, I was thinking about that even as I was talking, and I was getting a little bit uncomfortable, and my brain was doing the thing of like, I'm saying an idea, but I'm also critiquing my idea as I say my idea. And I'm like, okay, I feel like in our conversation so far, we're kind of leaving out the stereotypical presentation of autism with high alexithymia, with hyposensitive, where it's like, I am like with high alexithymia, it is more common to be externally oriented thinking versus internal reflective. So I love that you brought up alexithymia, and I'm still sorting out. I've heard the idea that behind every hyposensory person is a hypersensitive person. I like that idea. I'm not sure I fully agree with it, because I think neurologically it's maybe a little bit more complex than that. But that is a tension I feel around this conversation whenever we talk about the hypersensitivity of the autistic experience, or even like right now, you know, when folks are talking about the hypersensitivity of how we're experiencing this election right now. Like, there's also like autistic people who helped the president coming in get elected. So like there's not, or like justice sensitivity, there's not a monolith of autistic experiences. And so I always get in pretzels with this conversation. And I do think, and I think our podcast listeners, I think we tend to attract the like hypersensitive autistic person. But the autistic experience is so broad.
Mm-hmm.
I just said a lot.
Yeah. I mean, we can't know for sure. Certainly, I don't know for sure, and very much open to learning. But at least from the research I've done and clinical experience, and you know, I certainly might attract a certain type of client, et cetera. But my impression is alexithymia comes from the trauma literature. And we look at it that way. It makes sense to me. If in autism, right, there's different types of hyper and hypoconnectivity, and it is unique depending on the person, et cetera. But maybe, I mean, I'm not sure, but in theory, right, if on some level, big emotion for whatever, like, you know, and often punished for stimming, need to repress it, can't look different, can't notice things different, can't pick up on, can't behave different, et cetera. What's going to happen to the feelings? They need to go somewhere. And I think one of the ways they can be handled at a young age, perhaps, is to be dissociated away. And then you know, the focus is on other people.
Well, and this is so common post-discovery, where people will be like, I'm struggling more now. And I know I was like that. Like, my sensory stuff got more intense. And it's because I was thawing out, because I had coped with so much dissociation, especially from my body. So that I see that a lot, where post-discovery, like, sensory stuff gets more intense. Emotions can get more intense, because there is that like thawing out of that kind of chronic hypoarousal alexithymic state that many of us have gone to protectively. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I have a thing about the election, I could say. Patrick, did you want to say anything on this piece first, or what do you think?
I really like that you're moderating right now, so thank you for that.
I want you to be included.
I appreciate it. I'm enjoying what we're talking about, and I probably am just thinking, reflecting.
Okay, you'll hop in when you want to.
Yeah.
Sweet. And I just interrupted you. Maybe you were going to say something. Okay.
I was going to say, like, to a couple of points back, just that there becomes this almost like repression state in terms of, I don't want to be too much, right? Like, I don't want to come across as there's always something with me. And that's something that I've felt my entire life. So it's something I'm very aware of, like how I navigate, not only in social situations and whether that be masking or complete dissociation, but I think it leads to people pleasing too in a lot of situations. And then what you were saying, Karissa, sorry, I'm just listening to like planes fly overhead of my hotel, distracting me. Just that sense of being and being really authentic and responding authentically and maybe stimming a little bit, like you're mentioning, and how people can get irritated with that, like how that can eliminate the shadow side. I really like that perspective, because for a lot of people who may experience autistic people out in public doing those things or being really authentic or being really direct with communication, they may really wish that they could be those things. And they get so frustrated, right? Of like, how come I can't just respond this way? How come I can't interact this way? And diverging to a different thought is, in my retreats, I think about this a lot. People will say to me, similar stuff that you said to me when we were talking privately, that I make the people feel very, very comfortable by just being. And I've always tried to put words to that because I've never really been able to figure out how to openly state that, but that really helps give me perspective by if we consistently show up very authentically and just allowing ourselves to be ourselves, and how that has a ripple effect within. And I think that is really, really powerful. And it's a damn shame when we have to work so damn hard to repress it or mask it or suppress it because of how much of a strength that I look at it from that lens in terms of just that whole state of being. My words are getting jumbled, and I would associate that with,
Well, it's beautiful. Yeah.
not
It's profound. Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of like hero villain vibe, right? And this is another thing like depth psychology offers, like with the light shadow, like everything's got a shadow side. Side note, hero's journey also comes from this, archetypes, right? Like, I just know you like Lord of the Rings, Patrick. So, like, when we are our true selves, right? In theory, it really, like, part of why I love the hermit archetype and the lantern is like my branding, like my thing, right? I loved when I learned that the hermit not only is a hermit, because yeah, I'm a total hermit, but also they've got their lantern and they're kind of like lighting the path and they're kind of ahead of their time and it's kind of lonely, right? But they're also kind of like, you know, there's like something powerful to that where you could like inspire, be other people, like show them that there is light and they realize they have the light in themselves, you know, and they can like be with you too, and you can all be lit up together, right? It's really sad, tragic, unnecessary, and causes a lot of harm when people don't think they have that light within them or don't realize they can too, or you know, then the envy piece comes in, which maybe has more of like a destructive vibe to it. So both can be true, or both could be the reaction to the same thing, just from you sitting there being yourself. I'm going to say the thing about the election now because it kind of segues in. Yeah, this is tough stuff, and this is just one view of it. I mean, you'll hear a million people say all the different things and why and what, etc. And I can't even imagine the pain and horror and terror that a lot of people are feeling and experiencing. That's very real right now. But in terms of depth psychology and why it can offer a helpful frame, or at least some light into this. not only can I help give some insight into individual healing, but also collective. So there's this thing called the collective unconscious, and with that, there's the collective shadow, right? So when society's unexamined fears and biases, internalized oppression, for example, internalized ableism, transphobia, homophobia, sexism, xenophobia, racism, et cetera, when they're not looked at, when they're ignored, they stay in the shadow, right? The shadow leaks out and is projected. And when that happens, they're all projected onto marginalized groups. And then powerful figures, i.e. Trump, for example, can create an illusion of security by scapegoating differences, which actually is protecting like wealth inequality, power structures that harm working people, vulnerable communities, like the very things that he actually embodies, that he's, clouding what's actually happening by scapegoating marginalized groups, saying it's their fault. Yeah, so it might be obvious, right? But depth psychology like aligns with the idea that we really need to look at these things, at these collective shadows that America has. White people especially, we really need to do this work, examine all these internalized messages, narratives, oppressive aspects, biases, and be conscious of them so that we're not just projecting them and vulnerable to scapegoating people like this. Yeah.
I really love that. Projection in general has, I think, been perhaps the most significant psychoanalytic idea I've learned. It was so helpful for me in my parenting because there was a lot with parenting a PDAer when she was in her toddler years. There was a lot of projection that was happening, and once I understood that, and kids in general, well, correct me if I'm wrong here, but kids in general, like they communicate through their behaviors, which is kind of so we then get injected with the experience.
In their body.
And in their body. So like if you're a parent, you're experiencing a lot of projection, like you're experiencing the emotional experience of your child a lot of the time. And that framework has helped ground me both in my therapeutic work as a parent, but I love that you're bringing it into the collective space too, because I think it is really, it doesn't answer the big questions, but it's really grounding when we can understand that. And I think the temptation is like, I kind of feel like projection can be contagious, like temptation is for it to have a ripple effect. Like I've been very intentionally not plugged into the news right now, but there's one podcast I listen to, and it was really sad to hear. One of the reactions has been from the left to be telling Latino groups that things like you, I hope you get kicked out, the terrible things. But where we're seeing projection happening within our own, like those of us who are Democrat, those of us who are progressive, those of us who are grieving, I see the projection then continue. Like it's not, it continues into smaller and smaller groups to where we're hurting each other.
Absolutely, by design.
Yeah. And I think when we can understand that process, so we can be like, wait a minute, this is not an energy I want to be contributing to. I don't need to figure out who I can
really be mad at.
Yeah.
Right. People at the top.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so intentionally done, to create that division and that displacement of that emotion. And it's a lot easier to project that onto someone else than to say, like, let me really look inwards and see what we can do to elicit change or grow or learn from experiences. And yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, Megan. And it's heartbreaking to see stuff like that. Like, I hope you get deported because you helped him get elected. Like, that is completely nonsensical. And it almost creates fractures within subgroups of people who have shared beliefs and ideologies who no longer share those things because they're projecting grief, anger, fear, resentment, confusion, etc. elsewhere.
So this is actually, so Pod Save America is the one podcast that I can like metabolize right now, and I find it grounding. But this is something that they have been talking about that I find really interesting, is that, so like with Fox News and kind of on the traditional right, or even some of the influencers, because apparently that was a big piece of why Trump won. When someone from the right speaks, you don't have everyone in the right commenting, tearing that person down of like, well, you haven't checked, like you haven't checked your privileged here, or this comment is this, or this comment is that, like assigning, there's a lot of character assigning that can happen of like you're ableist for having this, or you're racist, or you're homophobic. There's a lot of that happens in the social media space on the left. And what they were saying is, on the left, if someone has a big audience and they're posting from their own people, they get like torn down. And I think I'm going to tie it back. I think partly what's happening, Karissa, is that the right, they're scapegoating the left. And I mean, I guess
or immigrants, but yes.
They're scapegoating trans people, immigrants.
Oh yeah.
Like everyone.
And sure, left. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
And I guess, I mean, we do some of that back, but we like go in on ourselves, and we're critiquing of each other in a way, like anyone who's in the left and has a large following, like you've got to have thick skin for when the comments come in.
Sure.
And there's not the same unified like voice as there is on the right. And I don't know if that has to do with, I mean, I have a few theories about what that has to do with, but I think this idea of projection might play into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, who knows? But in theory, right, I didn't really hear anyone except Bernie back in the day. Be nice if that carried forward. Like, I didn't hear that the Democrats really currently talking much about how they're going to go after corporate greed and acknowledging that like top 1% has all the money, right? And everybody, people are suffering and in pain, and 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, probably higher than that. Who knows how they're getting that stat? Like, it's not good, right? And when someone powerful and who represents the collective shadow of all these oppressive things says, I'll take care of you, and it's their fault, not yours. Oh, okay, right? And it's messed up. It's gross. It's fascism,
so,
but
yeah. This was another thing that they said over there was like, if you did a blind taste test of the policies, working class would choose like 9 out of 10, they would choose Democrat policies, but it's the messaging, like the messaging.
Right.
We're not connecting to working class struggles. We're not connecting.
They're not acknowledging
way.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So when it's unacknowledged, I feel like the right, it gave them an answer. It gave them a why.
Oh my gosh. It did.
About it.
A really clear why. This is why you are struggling, and here's what we're going to do about it. Even though if you do a deep dive into the policies, it's not going to help working class Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been done throughout the world over and over and over again. And yet we will watch it, process it, and talk about it. And it's like, how did this happen here? But this is a playbook as old as time. And I always think about the left side having no platform to stand on anything. It's always been, we're just not as bad as them. We're not Donald Trump. That's not a platform. So, can diverge a lot right now, and I'm gonna restrain myself.
Yeah, it's
do,
important. Thanks for tackling it. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I hope we can find a way to come together, partly come together, have something that we are like clearly working toward. No, but I mean, I know even before we recorded, we were like, do we want to open this can of worms? I'm feeling wiggly. I don't know how y'all are feeling, but
I'm just sad we're almost out of time.
Let's talk about assessment. Yeah, because
Yeah,
one of the
that's important
things
though. Thank you.
that
But
you
yeah,
really do that I don't know of other folks who are doing this, but you do comprehensive autism ADHD assessments, and you fold in kind of psychoanalytic, I don't know how you
hmm
would say it, psychoanalytic thinking into that. Like, I imagine you do a really robust like
hmm
history, and I know your feedback to folks is very layered. Can you, yeah, just talk a little bit about what it looks like to incorporate some of this really depth, soulful thinking into the assessments that you do?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I really believe, psychoanalytic insights are very important, valuable, and they can help autistic people rediscover their true selves. Like to me, that's healing. Um, Trauma is a massive reason why, right? That many of us don't quite know our true selves or have parts of us that are a bit repressed or waiting to be uncovered. Um, so I do this thing called Science with Soul. I love this line, and it, so for testing, I'm traditionally trained. I got my master's in a neuropsych lab and have a publication in a neuropsych journal. So I do a lot of traditional quantitative measures. But then after that piece is completed, what I make sure to do during the testing day is really just clinical interviewing based on like the 𝗿𝗍𝘀, the 𝗲𝗍𝘀, any other like remaining pieces. Basically, I'm doing an in-depth comprehensive assessment of everything, not just autism, ADHD, but everything neurodevelopmental and what I call like secondary mental health disorders, right? Or like symptoms. Um, I want to make sure I really understand their lived experiences, and I do this in a very collaborative way. I call it therapeutic assessment now. That's a term that's becoming a bit more popular. So I'm going to say that that's what I'm doing, which I think it is, which is cool. And yeah, I almost view it as like a crucible. It's not just are you autistic or not. I can't help myself. I've tried to just do that because I want to increase access, et cetera, but it's just not me. you know, I think what I do is like, yes, and, or, so what does that mean? What does this look like for you? Also, this trauma you've experienced, let's talk about it. I, I also, my dissertation was on covert psychological abuse. I've got a massive gaslighting angle that integrates nicely because we've often experienced that quite often, right? That could be really formative. So I want to really understand their life story and help them see it through a new lens. Yeah. So it's kind of like we journey to the underworld and back together. I'm kind of sharing insights as we go. Once I feel confident about something, I've already done a ton of prep beforehand. I've scored all their quantitative things. I'm ready to ask them all these nuances that I'm feeling out like through the meeting, my experience with them. I could, check on things, talk with them through things. And then I instead of like making them wait for some big reveal weeks later that then, like I'm sharing it with them. And I think it could be really healing. So it's almost like a, I don't know, life story, reflection, deep, hours long, crucible, cool time. And that's my style of assessment. Yeah.
I love that. You're not checking a box, are you autistic or not? It's like, let us understand the phenomenological experience, your phenomenological experience of what is it meant to move through the world as an autistic person, and then all whatever other secondary things are coming up. Let
Yeah.
us deeply understand this, and you can then move forward with this insight. I really love that. That sounds so healing. It sounds so therapeutic. Um, hmm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's really an honor. It's cool. I've been told, it's the first time they felt truly seen. I might sound like an asshole saying that, like, oh, I'm too, but it's like really like power. Like this is stuff that we could offer to people. Like this is important. And it's sad that they haven't gotten that before.
Absolutely.
You know, like, and I want to say a few different like points that come from psychoanalytic theory that kind of come up that I think are important. Like, you know, I'm sitting with them and I'm hearing them, sorry, you know, or like shaming themselves in front of me for as they like answer a thing too much or go into a special interest thing or whatever, you know, the ableist internalized thing is. And it's really powerful to get to kind of call them out, especially once we get a little rapport, right? And in real time. Because that's often such a big thing. And so those are corrective emotional experiences is what that's called, right? And where they get to experience what it's like to be seen and like safe to be unmasked or to reveal parts of themselves. I often am stimming along on camera with them. There's also a piece we didn't talk about yet, but I'll throw in where often I could feel if clients are dissociating.
Me too. I will start dissociating, even through telehealth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that goes with this energy thing, perhaps. You know, that's the thing where I had to really learn. It took a while because it always felt like it was me. Like, oh, I'm just this anxious whatever, you know. And the reason I'm saying this is because, you know, we're therapists, so we know like the term countertransference, and we're like reflecting on it. But I'd be willing to bet a lot of people listening across the board probably have this experience to some degree sometimes. You know, not everybody,
yeah, sure.
but yeah, like it's worth asking yourself, how was I feeling when I got here? Or, you know, is this mine? Or, you know, I'll never forget when we had the internship interviews, Meg. So for the doctoral program, right, we have to like do like 20 different interviews, and they're always the same questions. That was a powerful time where I was like, wow, they're the same questions, and I could feel how different I felt with each person. And that was like striking to me, like, whoa, maybe it's not just me. Yeah, it took that for me to really realize. And from there, you know, so what I'll do, back to the point, is like, wow, you know, I'm noticing, and I'll start to like point out or like say, oh, I'm noticing my throat's getting a little tight. I'm wondering, you know, right, are you experiencing anything or what's coming up for you? Or, yeah, it could really lead to some powerful stuff. Another thing I want to throw out there is that, so the secondary mental health disorders, I call them that because they're on top of. So when we have these unidentified, unaddressed, unacknowledged differences, neurodevelopmental differences, we got to survive somehow. There's often chronic complex trauma in micro and macro ways. And we do things to survive. They're called defenses, right? That's the psychoanalytic term, or, you know, mental health disorders they could become. But for example, like I frame generalized anxiety disorder as a defense against rejection-sensitive dysphoria.
That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. And there's some others too, but yeah.
Yeah. Are there other ones you see? Like, I'm curious what other like patterns you found.
Oh, yeah. So,
do you see depression as a defense against?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Defense against anger. Yeah. Often this anger thing is big, at least in clients I've worked with.
Yeah.
That seems to be a big theme, like this repression of anger.
I've heard, I can't remember who it was, but I've heard the idea that depression is anger turned inward.
Yep. That's an old psychoanalytic idea, I believe.
I was thinking so, yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like, the classic idea is, oh, when you see like the self-criticism, like, oh, I messed up, I suck. Blah. Like that would be like the repression of anger, like turned inward.
Which makes
Um,
sense because it's so
mhm.
unsafe for so many of us to be angry.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We learn that we're not allowed to be, that we're wrong to be, right? Back to the gaslighting of our perception often. We don't have a right to be. So it must be us who's messed up and whatever. Yeah, so that one's a big one. Like, maybe is there a way to ask, like, who am I really mad at? Or even just to like visualize, or if you don't have access to visualization, just like say out loud, or, I don't know, think about, or question, or imagine, whatever. Put on a song. I call it sacred rage sometimes.
Sacred rage. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to be mad at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Even institutions, like, my goodness, individuals, institutions, systems. There's a lot of oppressive shit. Like, it doesn't mean we have to go fight the man overtly per se, even though, yeah, join us. Yes, let's do it. But, like, just even holding them accountable in your mind and realizing it's not all your fault can be really powerful and important. So that's a big part of this. But when our true selves are riddled with shame and internalized ableism and all the things, and we've got all these defenses against RSD because it's so painful, and I did this again and I'm a failure, so I got an XYZ to prevent, we're not able to really be ourselves. And so this true self thing, that comes from psychoanalysis. And I'd say, like, it, at least from what I've seen in my experience, a lot of these secondary mental health conditions, the anxiety, social anxiety, which often is anger too, by the way, it's interesting. Like, they tend to become less intense or fade away when our autistic identity, neurodivergent identities are integrated. Yeah. But when
Yeah. I've seen
when our
that too.
shadows. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we realize
Yeah.
maybe we're not so bad. Maybe there is gold in the shadow. The things that we've been taught are wrong about us, maybe they're not. Yeah.
I love
Powerful.
that language of integrate, kind of integrating a neurodivergent identity as because it's like a developmental task. And the idea in a recent episode we did on giftedness, the idea of disintegration and integration came up as like that can be a common process post-discovery. And so this idea of, these are identities to be integrated, and in that work often that can help reprieve some of those other mental health conditions. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know the term integration, like in the DID community, right? Systems, sometimes that could be misused, the term integration. I'd say in terms of like true self, all that, I'd say true selves, right? Yeah. It's all about gaining more and more access to our parts, to our true selves, no matter what, like, and feeling safer to be them. Yeah. Which we all deserve. Absolutely.
And I feel like that's often the goal of a lot of depth therapy, is more access to self, more. Yeah, you're right. I've historically talked about it as an integrated self, but there's times where that language isn't appreciated. But more access to self, a more expansive self is also sometimes how I'll talk about it.
Yeah. Joseph Campbell said, hero's journey, dude. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the power a lot of people experience post-identification, especially in adulthood, is it gives many of us the freedom to finally be who we are. And there's a lot of power and healing in that.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sad it's over.
Yeah. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed this conversation, and it has diverged a lot. Like when I think back about on the last hour, I'm like, wow, we've traveled a lot of emotional places, from like laughter to like some very somber places to anger to like we've had an emotionally complex conversation. I've felt that. Yeah, it's felt really generative and really rich.
Mhm. Mhm. Part of me said I didn't get to tell you my big common conceptual thing that I like to say to clients or teach them. Maybe I'll do it now that I awkwardly said that. Yeah.
I was like, well, you can't like say that and then leave everyone hanging.
I know. Yeah. Well, got
Part
it.
2 coming out soon.
Well, go to my website. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I don't know, right? But there's many factors. However, I'll say it seems, at least with high masking autistic adults, often, not always, but often, there's this tendency toward obsessive thinking, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Well,
And I
there's
know
so
you
much
just did the
hypervigilance,
OCD.
and yeah,
Yeah, absolutely, right? So, and I need to listen to the whole OCD series. So, admittedly, I might say something that's totally in contrast to them, or maybe this is just a different adding on viewpoint. But from a psychoanalytic perspective, OCD one, there's this drive to like control the uncontrollable, right? But often there's this idea that feelings have been relegated to the dirt, to the childish, they're unacceptable. There's some feeling, often anger, again with the anger, like not allowed or not correct, right? And it goes with masking. It goes with rumination. It goes with like we gotta do intellectual cross neurotype translation. Of course, we're gonna be in our mind, etc. But like, it goes with this dissociation from feelings thing.
Mm.
To the point where sometimes I'll like see it in real time with clients, or I try to pay attention to it in my own life. Like maybe I get mad or something, or I see someone get upset, rightly so, they're upset. Maybe they don't even realize it, but the instant thing, instead, the conscious thing is, what did I do? Well, what if, what if I da. And that the obsessive thinking is going, right? Pretty automatic when maybe they have some feelings. And so the ultimate, I know it's different for everyone. There's different like interoception capacities, experiences, etc., things to work through, things that are just how they are. But in general, right? Like maybe there's some kind of emotional experience or bodily somatic experience embodied, whatever that is for the person. The idea would be maybe there's a way for thinking, feeling, sensing, perceiving, and whatever their true self way is, like that's the goal.
So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm getting you right. Like the obsessive thinking would be a defense against feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense intuitively as I think about myself, as I think about people I know's experience.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty wild. And
Yeah, it is.
the controlling the uncontrollable thing, it makes sense. And similarly, with eating disorders, there's different, views, understandings, conceptualizations.
There's a lot of creative ways that we avoid our emotions as neurodivergent people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But you'll hear the control thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But another way to think about it, like symbolically, that psychoanalytic aspects would add is like maybe fear of taking up space, right? Having needs. And there's such a symbolic like that kind of comes out in eating as symbolic for emotional. Yeah.
Yeah.
The right to
And
have
feelings
needs.
take up a lot of space, and you don't know how containable it'll be. So to like dip into our feelings, and it's like, well, I don't know when this starts and when this ends. And so, yeah, let me just put it in a tight box and lock it up.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea is with all these things and these ideas, I mean, certainly if it doesn't resonate, we're not going to push it on the person. Like, you know, it's about figuring out what does resonate for them. But if we kind of have a pulse on it and the why or some kind of frame, and it makes some kind of sense, then at least maybe we can understand ourselves a bit more, have more self-compassion, and realize and like, oh, and actually like where this came from, what it's doing, and thank ourselves even on some level maybe, or we're trying to survive because XYZ. And yeah.
I love that, because you're looking at like, what is the functioning of this thing? When we just focus on symptom reduction, we miss that piece of like, wait, this thing is here. Like maybe anxiety is here, or obsessiveness is here, and it's actually trying to protect me. Let me appreciate what it's trying to protect me. And I think we have to do that work before we can even really meaningfully reduce symptoms. We have to understand what it's protecting us from. And
Absolutely.
so, I really love the depths you bring in that way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think IFS kind of goes with that vibe a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. IFS does that well too, of like, you've got protective parts and what is it? And then and also yeah. Yep. Well, I've really enjoyed this meandering conversation. I know, like, I want to be like, where can people find you if they want more? But I also know your assessment list is so long that I don't want to send people there. But do you have, like, I know you have a website, but do you have ways people can connect with your work if they're interested in working with you, or if they're therapists interested in consulting with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've shifted my practice a bit, and I am focusing on the therapeutic assessments now. I am very motivated to see people in that capacity. And so I would say, even if you see that there might be a wait, I would love for you to join my wait list if you are interested. I work with clients who are adults in Massachusetts, California, and Washington State. That's where I'm licensed via telehealth. And you could go to my website, divergentpathways.com, to learn more about working with me and to join my wait list if you're interested. It's non-binding. And there's a bunch of resources on my website too.
You have a great resource section. Like if people just want that alone, like your resource section is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, cool. Yeah. So definitely check that out. Thank you, Meg. And I also have an advocacy page, so feel free to follow my Facebook. So that's facebook.com/Divergent Pathways. Would love to see you there. And I do provide consultation to other clinicians worldwide and would be honored to work with you. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm sad it's over.
Yeah.
Geez. I
need
could
to
sit
have
in
you
the
back.
crucible with you all day. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'd love to come back. Thank you for diving in the depths with me. And, you know, I know this was a heavy one a bit after. This is the first one you've recorded after the election, right?
It's the first one where we've talked about it. I think the last few we've been in dissociative distraction. It's the first one where we've mentioned the election. And yeah, that was a week ago. Oh my gosh, it was a week ago today.
Yeah.
So it's still fresh. Still fresh.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's an honor to be here with you both. Thank you. And thanks to the listeners too. And hope to be back. And solidarity.
Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
I was telling Megan before just before we close, like you took one of my first coaching programs about starting your private practice. And I just remember how anxious and overwhelmed you were about like, not only will this ever work or be successful, but will I ever encapsulate what I want it to like really be? And I think you've done a remarkable job. So congratulations on everything you've done. And it's been great just becoming a friend and a colleague, and really, really appreciate you.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Patrick. Wow. Yeah, you were there when I made my name and everything. Actually, what a Divergent Salt. Nope.
I think we went on a long journey for that one. So,
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
expected.
Oh, yeah. Divergent Pathways. Yeah. Thank you. So cool. So special. So sacred. Really cool stuff. Yeah. Okay. I'll see you later.
There you go.
Okay.
We should have our guests do the sign off from now on. Just like whatever comes to your mind, go. New episodes are out on Fridays on all major platforms and YouTube. I think Megan said last episode, if you like the podcast and find it online. See you next week.